Sarah, what's the problem with conformity? Is there a problem? Is there a crisis of conformity?
There's actually none, and everyone can go home. It's fine.
Let's just save a lot of time.
So what we're talking about with the conformity crisis is two kinds of censorship are happening. So there's the kind of censorship that is being exerted onto people and institutions. You have outside forces saying, you know, it's really not a good idea for you to do this. Are you sure you want to lose that funding opportunity? And then you also have the censorship that's being self-absorbed, where people have these mindsets where they assume that they're expected to do this kind of censorship. And so they're doing it without even being asked. And I think there are obviously a lot of different sectors where this happens. There's a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of different inspirations for censorship. But what I've been focusing on is the way that authoritarian governments have been in some ways abusing our universities, our student bodies, our professors, our faculty to create this culture within higher education where they know that universities are relying on them for money, for expansion opportunities, for global opportunities, and so they're going to make the best they can of it. And so we now have this culture taking place in higher education where in some ways autocrats who live thousands of miles away are dictating what's said and taught and researched in higher ed.
So can you give us some examples, like, because your book is replete, Authoritarians in the Academy, your book is replete with examples. Let's just start in, you're American, I'm American. We'll start there, we'll go to the Anglosphere, and then we'll talk about New Zealand. So what's happening in the US? Can you give us some examples of the authoritarians?
So there's a perfect example, and I don't love that it was so perfect, but just as I sat down to start writing this book, I swear 2 days later, this shocking incident happened at George Washington University, which is in Washington, D.C., heart of America, you know, the power center of the United States. And what happened there was it was just as the Beijing Winter Olympics were beginning in 2022. And so some students anonymously put up some artwork by this Chinese-Australian artist called Badiachao. And he has had, some of you might have heard of him before, he has had his own run-ins with censorship with the Chinese government because he's a dissident artist. And so students put up this artwork that displayed in kind of stylized versions, sort of reflecting the Olympic branding, China's human rights abuses. And obviously the implication was it's not appropriate for China to be hosting the games. You can debate whether or not, you know, that's a fair argument, but that's a pretty basic standard discussion to have on a college campus or off a college campus. But some student groups, two student groups specifically, one, the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, which I write a lot about in the book and which has in some ways been a villain in some of these censorship stories, they contacted George Washington's president and offices within the university, and they said, this is hurtful, this is offensive, and this is racist to Chinese students to have to see this kind of artwork about the Chinese government. And you know, students do have the right to say those things. They have the right to complain. They have the right to object. But the onus is on the university leadership to say, we have a free speech policy. People are allowed to criticize the Chinese government at our American university. Here's the thing, that is not at all what happened. George Washington University's president himself said he was personally offended by the posters, and that here's where it gets crazy. He said they were going to have campus security remove them, and then they were going to conduct an investigation to see who posted artwork criticizing the Chinese government. And they even started to review security footage.
Wow.
And so these are the kinds of decisions that are being made at the university, you know, high level. And this is something I write about a lot in this book. It's this term I'm using called sensitivity exploitation. But it's people taking advantage of these notions of, wanting to, stop offense and bias and hate, and abusing that notion to say, well, you know what I think is hateful? Criticizing the government that I like. And so this is something that's been happening at a lot of campuses. And so fortunately, George Washington University, I was one of the critics. There were a number, including some senators, who said, what the hell are you guys thinking? And they reversed course. But the damage was done. I actually went and found those students and I interviewed them. And it turns out that most of them were international students from China and Hong Kong who came to the United States under the impression that they finally had the chance to speak their mind and criticize their government. joke was on them there. But the students felt that, it was clear that their university picked a side, that they wanted to make sure that they would, not offend a superpower, the Chinese government, and that those students were ultimately the victim of that. And they felt that, it was a clear sign that their free speech rights were not really being valued.
Yeah, it's a great example of corruption. In your book, you write about something that I've attempted to alert people. By the way, once you start doing this, you can't go to China, we can't go to China. No, that's actually true. And nobody in our family can go to China either. So every time I route a place, I have to make sure it doesn't go through China. So I want to talk about something I think is urgent to talk about, the Confucius Institute, which you write about in your book.
Yes.
Sounds great, terrific branding like Krav Maga, sounds great, doesn't work. But the Confucius Institute, talk to us about that.
Yeah, so here's the history of Confucius Institutes. And the reason why it's been so effective is that universities somehow are always looking for funding. So when they see someone handing them something for free, they are going to take it. And so what happened with Confucius Institutes was that the Chinese government has this government body that was organizing partnerships between Chinese universities and foreign universities. And the idea was that, okay, we connect you with this Chinese university, and through us, through the government, we will give you a few $100,000 to start this institute. We'll give you teaching staff. We'll give you resources, educational materials. Sounds great. We can teach Chinese language courses for free.
Oh, who wouldn't want that?
Universities want that. And so it's presented as this, token of friendship. But what has happened is that ultimately these are government outposts at foreign universities all around the world. And they have actively pressed for censorship at American universities, but also other universities around the world too. They have said, it sure would be a shame if we had to end this partnership because you're hosting this Tibetan speaker on campus. We really don't want to have to, end this, but we're not sure that this partnership can remain with these kind of things taking place on campus. And some of the international students from China who I've spoken to said that they walk by it and they feel like the Chinese government is right there on campus watching them. And for the most part, we have pushed these out of the United States. There's been a lot of media and political focus on them, but they're still all around the world, and it actually hasn't eliminated these underlying partnerships. So the Confucius Institutes are somehow, in some ways disappearing, but that underlying partnership between American universities and Chinese universities is still there.
Yeah, the other part of that is they record the names of people who say things that are offensive to the government, and then there's some sanctioning when they go back. So it's a tremendous problem. Okay, so do you have one more from the U.S.? So I don't want anybody to think we're being too light on the U.S.
Well, I could give you a number more from the U.S., but for the sake of time, there's this one university that you might have heard about. It's called Harvard University,
yes.
I think some people might know about that one. But here's a great example of what we're talking about when we say universities censoring without being told to. So about 2015, Harvard was hosting this dissident Chinese lawyer on campus, and good on them for having a role for him on campus. But he wanted to host an event about human rights in China, and he was in touch with university leadership about it, and a vice dean at Harvard Law told him, you cannot hold this event on this date you want to. And the reason why was because Harvard's president at the time was in China meeting with Xi Jinping. And he said that it would embarrass the university to have an event criticizing China while the president was there trying to advance ties in China. And so nobody told him he had to do that. Nobody said you're not allowed to let this Chinese dissident lawyer hold this event. But that was the assumption. That was, well, we think that it's not going to be good for our relationship, so we're going to censor without anybody asking us to. And that's kind of even harder to deal with than the overt, obvious censorship.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about that, like when I think of Harvard, beside conspicuous ideological capture, I think to myself, it's like a university that's attached to a hedge fund. So that wasn't financially motivated, right? So it had to be motivated by some internal ideology. Okay, so that's the U.S. Everybody satisfied that we got to? We could speak all day, but I want to just hit the Anglosphere. All right. England. Let's talk about England. You write about that in the book.
England has all of the same problems as the United States. Some ways worse because it at least it doesn't have a First Amendment to deal with some of the more obvious censorship issues. We could have a whole other conversation about censorship in the UK, but that's for another time.
Right.
But the UK has had all of these things. They have the same reliance on international students for tuition, for example. So there's that same incentive to not offend the Chinese government, to not limit their access. And there have also been, again, the direct orders from people who are high up in university leadership not to hold events that would upset the Chinese government. One happened at Jesus College, for example.
Jesus College.
Jesus College. I'm sure Jesus, would
Right-
love
right
to
there.
censor events about
Right.
human rights. But someone there was saying that, you can't have an event that's only critical about the treatment of Uyghurs because you need to not be looking like a university that's campaigning for the Uyghur minority community in China, which, for anyone unfamiliar, was a religious and ethnic minority in China that is probably experiencing some of the worst repression of any group in the world.
Yeah, there are actual camps there that they intern people, which is it's a whole other
Yeah,
conversation.
it's a horrific police state that these people are forced to live
But
in.
nobody says that about the Nazis. No one's like, well, how unfortunate we got to give the others. I mean, so it's a very unusual kind of a take on that.
Yeah, and it's the idea that you don't want to be perceived as a university that is critical of the Chinese government because
But why?
there are real financial repercussions. So there's a few different ways that can come across. One can be if you have partnerships, if you have funding, if you have grants, that can be easily revoked. But another one is also, as I mentioned, the international students. And this is something universities are genuinely fearful of. So international students tend to pay more tuition than local students. There are some universities in the US, for example, where 40% of the student body is international. And usually Chinese students will be a pretty large portion of that 40%. And they're rare, but the Chinese government has made clear that they will at times revoke access. There was a Canadian university that hosted the Dalai Lama in, I think it was 2011. And in retaliation, the Chinese government de-recognized degrees from that university. So no more students would attend that university. And that kind of thing is rare, but here's the thing, you only need to do these consequences so many times because people will learn the lessons and they will absorb them and they will act them out on their own. And so that's what they're afraid of.
Okay, so before we go out to talk about other countries, clearly this is not just China. I mean, certainly they're a culprit in this, but clearly this is not merely China.
No, it's not just China. It's essentially anyone with the money and the will can make this happen. We're seeing it a lot with the Gulf states as well. There's a lot of universities that have been, convinced to expand because, in the UAE, in Qatar, they are offering sometimes shocking amounts of money for universities to expand there. And, some people say that this is, an attempt at whitewashing, that these governments who have been accused of a lot of human rights abuses are able to point to these storied American academic institutions and say, how bad can we be if Northwestern University is opening a campus here, if Georgetown University opens a campus here. But what they've done is they've opened satellite campuses there, and then what happens when you open a campus in a country with some of the worst human rights records in the world? You have to follow the law of those countries. And we've had universities that have been pretending that they can both keep their commitments to free speech and academic freedom and maintain campuses in those countries. And it doesn't actually work. Georgetown, for example, censored debate about blasphemy at its campus in Qatar and they finally admitted after lots of pushback that it's because Qatar has a blasphemy law, and they are ultimately bound by what the local law is. So there's this conflict between a university's values and what the law is where they expand. But those are pesky little things that you don't want to have to consider when there's hundreds of millions of dollars that are being offered.
If anything were antithetical, you would think it would be blasphemy laws and free speech.
I would think that. I mean, that's kind of the most archaic, ancient censorship law that there is, right? You can't offend God and whatever the religious authorities say God is and his beliefs are.
And yet we've done the same thing in our institutions when instead of God, we've replaced that with a kind of political correctness. There are certain things you can't say. Remember three Iranians, Ahmadinejad and I can't remember the guy's name, the Khatami. The argument that they made was, in the United States, you can't use the N-word, but you can insult Muslims and burn a Quran and commit blasphemy. And all we're asking is the same, just basic decency about the N-word. That's all we want. Can you speak to that?
Well, so for starters, it is legal to say the N-word and other slurs. Obviously, there are social criticisms you're going to get, but without some kind of threat, without some kind of harassment, it's legal to say slurs. The U.S. does not have the concept of hate speech in our laws. You can say very, very hateful things, and in some ways we're actually very proud of that legacy because we think it's ensured that the government cannot punish dissent, that the government doesn't get to decide what hate is. I mean, just a few months ago, Donald Trump said hate speech is speech that is hateful about him. So you can kind of see the risk of letting the government define what hate is. There are some issues that arise from that. So A, the facts of that are wrong alone. But B, yeah, it absolutely should be legal to burn a Quran. It should be legal to burn any holy book, any book. If you want to burn this one, feel free to. You just have to buy it first.
Authoritarians in the Academy.
Buy it
and burn it in your backyard. No offense. So here they have a speaker's corner here, and in London they have a speaker's corner, but we don't need a speaker's corner because we have the First Amendment.
Yeah, it's taken some hits in recent years, but we have the First Amendment, and I think it's the best free speech law that we have in the world.
I've often wondered why people just don't adopt it, but that's another conversation. So we got the United States, we've got England. Let's do a few more out of the Anglosphere, but my brain is thinking like we'll just divide this up geographically. Anything else in Western Europe? I doubt Eastern Europe, but that's particularly egregious you want to talk about? Oh, is there anything in Eastern Europe?
There actually, there were some really concerning things that happened in Hungary years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the Hungarian government specifically sought out huge amounts of money from the Chinese government, specifically to give them, land, to start what's the largest, I believe, satellite Chinese university in Europe was going to be in Hungary. And there was a lot of local fights about that. The mayor of Budapest was in a lot of disputes with the government over that and started renaming streets after human rights figures in China as kind of a protest of that. So, Eastern Europe has actually even had it as well. But in Western Europe, there's been a lot of issues with Confucius institutes there. In Germany and Spain, they have reached out to Portugal and said, you can't hold this book event, or we're going to leave and you're going to lose this funding. And there's kind of even a greater implication of that because, to be honest, losing your Confucius Institute is not really that big of a deal in the long run. But the other ties, the other future opportunities you'll get, that could be a much bigger price to pay. And there's been a lot of these issues in Canada. Canada has been very hard hit.
Okay, let's go. Yeah, okay. I should have gone up from Canada. Okay, so from the U.S. Okay, so Canada. Give us a couple in Canada.
So Canada had what to me was one of the most interesting examples. And earlier I mentioned this idea of sensitivity exploitation, of abusing these notions of politeness, of avoiding offense. And so at Canada's McMaster University, a few years ago, a student group invited a Uyghur speaker to come talk about her experiences being targeted by the Chinese government, things like that. And the CSSA chapter there, the group I mentioned earlier, they wrote to the university and they said a few interesting things. One was that they were in touch with the local Chinese consulate, that the Chinese consulate was watching to see how things unfolded, and that they were going to be aware of how McMaster responded. And then the student group also claimed that this invitation to a Uyghur speaker violated the university's hate speech policy. So you kind of can't get a more perfect distillation of what sensitivity exploitation looks like than that. And it's a really interesting example of how democratic nations that do pursue these crackdowns on hate speech create openings for hate speech laws to maybe be used in ways that they weren't exactly thinking about, but that's the inherent risk of that kind of law. Fortunately, the university did not side with them, they didn't censor the speech, but students did go and disrupt that talk, and filmed the attendees.
Oh,
and the implication was that those images were going to be sent to the consulate so they could see who was attending and if any of their students were there so they could face punishment and retaliation at home.
These people, they're just so full of shit. No, I mean, they really are full of shit. It's like they'll start off these things with land acknowledgments. Oh, we have this tribe was here and you can't say this is a microaggression, we're going to hurt. Meanwhile, people are being interned in literal concentration camps, and they want everyone to be silent about it. I mean, these people are just, they're just bad people. Like, that's what, that is what a bad person would do. A bad person would not, it's fucking genocide. It's the gold standard for what is bad.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm not going to challenge you.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay, we're on the same page now. Yes.
We'll find other things to fight about.
Yeah, but it's astonishing to me. It seems to me that the institutional neutrality would be like, we're not going to get involved at all, or guess what, we're going to get involved, and we're going to literally get involved in everything. And there's no like, we're going to selectively, especially if they, in fact, exclusively if they receive state funding, federal funding. So then, my own view, maybe we disagree on this, but my own view is if you don't receive federal funding, you can, if you want to research the earth is flat, you're more than welcome to. You can get donations and claim the earth is flat, publish in flat earth journals, that's great. But the moment you start receiving federal funding, you're held to different standards, and that's what Trump wants to do for repudiation of Biden, Title VII and other things. But before we go down that rabbit hole, unless you want to comment on that.
I think there are a couple different things there.
Okay.
So I think there's two separate questions. Sorry, the Americans are going to go on the rant about this now. So the first is, should universities be receiving federal funding in the first place? And that's something that people fight about a lot. That's a separate legal question than, is this the appropriate measure to punish universities? And that's where I would definitely part ways. I'm not comfortable with the way that this revocation effort has been going on the part of the Trump administration. Some of it, I think, has been outright unconstitutional. We are people who love the Constitution a lot, so we're not going to be okay with that. And it's been made clear by some of the communications from the Trump administration that they are specifically targeting universities because they don't like some of the ideologies expressed. And to me, you don't stop censorship in higher ed through that way. That's just more censorship. So I have a lot of problems with that. But whether people want to debate, the question of funding in the first place is a separate issue, I think.
But it certainly doesn't have to depend to at least a certain extent on what the ideology is. If they're talking about throwing people in ovens, right? There has to be some kind of threshold for, or no?
I am uncomfortable with I think some of the basics of academic freedom case law in the United States is the notion that we do not let the government decide what orthodoxy is. I think some of the most beautiful language about the First Amendment actually comes from cases that are carefully warning against letting the government decide which ideas are too extreme, too inappropriate, too hateful, too offensive. And so revoking funding that has been issued on the basis of the content of the speech alone does just create issues.
Oh, so you do conceive of it as a funding issue as opposed to just saying you can't say this?
Both present constitutional issues, I think. Right. Yeah.
Because I'm also thinking there's a thing now, hopefully it'll be short-lived, minor attracted persons. There's bodies of literature for people who are pedophiles. And so that's a separate conversation, but there does seem to be minimal thresholds ideologically that one should, but that's a separate conversation. But because I know people are listening to these stories and thinking, wow, we live in New Zealand, we're like on an island and we're in the middle of nowhere, and these things couldn't possibly affect us, right? I know someone's thinking that here.
Leave if you do. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, so this doesn't happen in Australia and New Zealand, right?
So Australia has been, I think, one of the worst victims of this issue. I swear he wasn't, we didn't plan for him to set me up on that one. Australia has had, I'm sure some of you are familiar with these stories, Australia has a huge number of international students from China that have come in, and there have been issues that followed from that. There was one Australian university, the name is escaping me right now, but they had invited the Dalai Lama to speak, and the student guild at this university they received some complaints from students who found them offensive, and so their response was to say that all future speakers should not offend any specific group, and should be respectful of all group sensitivities. It literally said sensitivities.
Wow.
You can see where I got the idea for sensitivity exploitation.
Yeah, it's like sensitivity creep.
Yeah.
You know, you go from individual properties of ideas to properties of people. You know, like this is a bad idea, this is a bad person, this is a bad government. And so even, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an attorney, but the First Amendment is hierarchically prioritized in the sense it's been written in through contemporary jurisprudence and such that political criticisms are held in the highest form, like we don't sanction these, whereas then we have like types of pornography that are on the bottom of the...
Yeah, pornography is going to be treated a little differently. Obscenity is... it is very difficult to meet the level of obscenity.
But I know it when I see it as part of sources. Yeah.
But, back to the question of, is this in New Zealand? Is this in Australia?
Yeah, so it's in Australia.
It's in Australia.
But it's not in New Zealand. I mean, we just got an ocean here. We're not...
Well, part of the reason why I think Delane and the Free Speech Union wanted to bring me out is because my understanding is that this is actually a conversation that's been happening in this country. To what extent is foreign powers, specifically the Chinese government, maybe bullying, dictating, deciding what happens in our country, even though that's a foreign government that's far away. But it is happening to a certain extent. I'm sure some of you might be familiar with the Auckland University of Technology issue that happened a few years ago.
Could you, for those who aren't, would you please?
No, I won't explain it. That's
okay.
But what happened was some documents that were released under New Zealand's Freedom of Information laws revealed that the Chinese Consul General contacted the university and they said, hey, we're under the impression that you're going to have this event about the Tiananmen massacre on your campus. We don't want that. Let's have a conversation. And the documents revealed a really worrying tone that the university responded with. They said, listen, it's not happening. It wasn't a sanctioned event. They said, we're happy to tell you that this event will not be going forward. And here was the thing that really, really caught me. They used this line, we have no wish to deliberately offend the government of China or its people. And you could have an interesting conversation about should a university aim to offend a government? Should it be trying to
offend
upset
a
power?
government? Offense is a property of how do you even offend a government?
But this idea that okay, maybe you think a university shouldn't go out of its way to offend a government, but it certainly shouldn't go out of its way not to. That's not what the purpose of a university is. It's not to please power. It's not to
yeah, if you think governments can be anthropomorphized, like kind of like a person or a creature, but like I don't get. Okay, so I saw this thing here. So I want to ask you this question. So this was on the table over here. It says, people should be allowed to argue, question, offend, and dissent. That's what the Free Speech Union is about. But why? Why should people be allowed to question, argue, and offend? Because you've said offend a few times.
I just love offending.
Well, then you have a high bar to offend the people in this audience. But why should people be allowed to offend other people? And that's the number one comment we get when Reed and I were in Lisbon and someone said, well, what do you do? And I just didn't want to deal with it. I was just tired. I had been drinking, and I'm like, well, we advocate for free speech. Remember that, Reed? And the guy just lost his mind. It turns out he's a good friend of Governor of California, Gavin Newsom. And the whole meal, the guy didn't talk to us. He's giving me the evil looks, the devil eye. Like, you would think that, but forget the fact that the possibility that I could be offended by his offense. So I just don't understand, what is the problem with offending people? I genuinely don't get it.
I think that there is this notion, there's definitely been some conflation of the concept of physical harm and emotional harm, or, the nebulous mental harm. And some people do feel like they are, we use that word feel, right? Some people do think that you shouldn't have to experience discomfort, that you shouldn't have to experience that emotional or mental discomfort that comes from hearing things you don't like. And I hear a lot of things I don't like. I spend way too much time on the internet. It's not always a walk in the park. But the thing is, most of us don't want to live under some other person's conception of what's too offensive.
Yeah.
You probably don't want to live under mine. I probably don't want to live under yours.
Definitely don't want to live under mine, because I have it's like it doesn't exist in my world.
But so there's two ways to look at it. A, we probably aren't very comfortable with other people setting those parameters for us. But B, there actually might be some value that comes from that discomfort, from that unrest. Most of us have probably, hopefully, changed our minds a few times in our lives and realized that maybe we learned something, but there was probably some discomfort that came from that. There's this funny notion that I shouldn't have to hear this thing if I know it's wrong, but sometimes you actually even get better, even if you don't end up agreeing with the person that you're fighting with or that's making you mad. You might get better at defending your own argument just from hearing theirs and from finding out how to best to combat it. So there is actually still some value in hearing things that are offensive, even if it will never convince you. And sometimes just the basis alone of someone saying, wow, I'm really obnoxious jerk, it's really good to know who that person is, right? So you know to avoid them in the future. So there's value in it, even if it's not always comfortable. And I'm not pretending that it's always fun, but not everything that, exercise isn't always fun, but we probably should be doing that too, right?
You would think that the one place that would secure the right to be offended would be a university. And even like if you drill down, got more granular, you would assume it's in an ethics class.
I would assume that,
You
sure.
would assume that. That's certainly not the case in my experience. Okay, so to question, to offend, to dissent without fear of punishment. So I think you've covered offend. Have you ever heard you're just for free speech because you want to use the N-word? Have you heard that? People have said that to me.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
This place that I work in the U.S., we defend all viewpoints. We are nonpartisan. We
Fire Greg Lukianoff. He was the one who wrote the piece with about
Jonathan.
safety.
Yeah.
In the Atlantic.
Coddling. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's his book. Yeah.
Yeah. We defend. The same day, for example, we might be having a case of someone who is the most anti-Israel viewpoints you could come across, and on the same day, someone who has the most pro-Israel positions. And we really do defend people across the political and ideological spectrum. And so we come across a lot of people who say, well, you're just in this because you love this speech. And listen, if I loved all of the speech that I was defending, I would be a very confused person because it doesn't actually all matter. It doesn't add up very well together.
It reminds me of when I was in the atheist movement. Every once in a while, a Christian would come to me and say, you're only an atheist because you want to sleep with men. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so sorry.
We're gonna move on from that one.
Let's just move on from that. So we've got the offend, dissent, think out loud with fear, question, argue. Those form the roots. Those are necessary methods of error correction so that society can kind of democracy, free markets. All of those things are necessary so that we can fix mistakes and correct errors. Mm-hmm. And so what we've seen in the last few years is, because I'm 59, when I was a kid, free speech was largely on the left. I mean, that was the champion position of the left, and now it's swung the other way. But not, Trump is against flag burning, et cetera, and FIRE publishes its list of people who have been disinvited, and predominantly those are by the left, but from those off campuses, those are by the right, which is very interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've got, I just want to drill down a little more in the New Zealand thing. When you look at these cases in your book, you talk about these around the world. Is there any themes that emerge from all of this?
Yeah, there's a few themes. So one is just absolutely this fear of financial repercussion. And we see this, I think these things matter most in higher education, because as we've discussed, I think it's important that universities be places where you can dissent, question. The knowledge and research that we all rely on and that future generations will rely on is coming from our universities. It really matters that these places can be free. There could be future generations that don't understand the world as it is now because of the censorship that we allow to take place.
Even worse than that, the replication crisis, where studies can't be replicated, ideological capture of journals, and the list goes on and on. And what Musk has said repeatedly is that AI is being trained by those models. And so ChatGPT, et cetera, you get very different answers when you compare those models next to each other.
You've given me the perfect
Perfect.
Where I wanted to go with this.
Awesome.
So I'm really worried about the way this is happening in higher education. But this is not a higher education problem. It matters most that it's happening in higher education, but this is every industry. Almost every industry now is global. So we have tech, media, the movies you see, the books you read, all of these things are influenced by these issues. And so what's fascinating about AI, so I don't know how many of you are AI users, but DeepSeek, for example, has gotten a lot of attention as a very popular AI model that is a Chinese company that, you pop in a question about mathematics and it tells you that Tibet is not a country or something like that. Right. But so you might think, okay, sure, that's a Chinese company. Of course you're going to expect that. But it's not just Chinese companies that are doing this. Some of you might be familiar with MidJourney AI, which is an image generating company. It first rose to fame because it created the image of Balenciaga Pope, which is permanently in my mind. Right. But MidJourney AI lets you make images mocking...
Hold on one sec.
They're
it
coming
happens
for
even
us,
here in Auckland. In New York, that would be like, or in Paris, would be like every 2 seconds. Okay, go ahead.
So MidJourney AI, you can make pictures mocking Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Vladimir Putin. You cannot make images mocking Xi Jinping. There is a major exception, and this is an American company run out of San Francisco. And the reason why is because they want to be able to sell this company, they want to be able to sell its goods in China. And so they are creating a global rule. So you could be logging in from New Zealand, and if you try to make too many images mocking Xi Jinping, you'll get locked out and banned from using it.
Wow.
And so we have these incentives that are, nobody said you have to do this. Right. This is just a company making what it thinks is a smart financial decision that ultimately affects how people around the world are able to maybe just make memes. But it's not just going to be memes. It's going to be a lot of broader issues. And so this is something that's in every industry. And there was an article that came out just this past week about the Victoria and Albert Museum in the UK, one of the most famous art museums in the world. They print their catalogs in China because it's cheaper. And so it came out that because you have to run everything you print in China through a censorship body, they had to remove certain maps that they use, historical maps, not even present day ones, from the catalog that was going to be available in their museum in the UK. They also had to remove a picture of Vladimir Lenin because that was too controversial or too sensitive. And so this is a company just trying to save money, print things as cheaply as possible, and because of that, people who attend this museum in the UK are reading material that's been censored by the Chinese government. And this is all across industries, this is happening.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We thought that the capitalist mechanism would help liberalize these societies, but instead we're bending and yielding. There's a thing about John Cena, the actor.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, then do you remember anything about it?
Yeah, he was doing promotion for one of the Fast and the Furious movies, and he just said, and he speaks Mandarin, so he posted this video advertising it. It's released in Taiwan, and he said that was the first country that the film was going to be released in. And for that, he had to post this. Honestly, it was kind of humiliating to watch this apology video where he said sorry over and over again for accidentally calling Taiwan a country. And the thought that you would have to, perform that kind of apology over something that most people would not read as something that requires an apology.
Yeah, so that's what's super interesting to me about this is that I used to think that the the market mechanism would override things like that, like it would be a great corrective. But I've seen firsthand, and the ideology is so powerful and the sense to belong is so intense that people will forego economic interests, or they'll do anything in service to the ideology. It really is like a universal solvent. It just destroys everything it touches. It literally damages every mind. Okay, so are there any other, I know there are, but do you want to talk about any other egregious instances in other countries before we go on to the next?
I think we cover the main one, but
Okay.
one thing that we haven't really gotten to touch on too much is just the way that this has targeted international students in countries around the world. So obviously some students are taking up this mantle of censorship, saying, I'm going to make sure that my university is not allowing this horrific speech. But there's also a lot of dissident students, Australia especially, who have specifically been the recipient of threats from the Chinese government. Because that they have done really, really simple things like just holding a sign or posting a single tweet, and they've been interrogated at the airport. And here's the big one: their families have been brought in for
Exactly.
questioning by police.
Exactly.
And so it's this powerful
People don't
lever
realize
of
that.
control.
Yeah.
Would any of us really keep posting something if we thought one of our family members was going to go to prison? Of course, we would all probably throw our phones in the ocean.
Right.
And so it's a really powerful way to control people, because nobody wants to have that guilt. And a lot of people might reach the conclusion that what I have to say really isn't worth the price that I have to pay. And
For sure.
And one quick last story. One of the students that I spoke to, who's also from the Washington D.C. area, he was a law student at Georgetown. He's one of the few students who has come forward under his real name to talk about what happened, and it's because he thinks it's at the point where he cannot return home to China. His parents have been brought in for questioning because he joined a protest against China's COVID-0 policies when he was at Georgetown. And for that, he thinks he is not going to be able to see his family again. I mean, these are the stakes that students are dealing with just because they, go to a protest, do the most basic thing that a student can do, and that could determine the course of their life. It's really incredible.
Yeah, with so much vehement anti-immigration in the U.S., the sentiment, I would give that guy a visa in a heartbeat. I'd find all these people who have been single out, visa. After the Ukraine war, I said, let's just brain drain the whole country. We'll take all the Russians, all the nuclear science, and we'll just give them green cards. No, for real. But the sentiment has switched rather dramatically on that. Okay, so just one more thing, just parenthetically, I had it in my head. I was thinking when you were talking, offices of equity, diversity, and inclusion have been weaponized to punish people, even if they know they don't have anything on the dissident faculty member, to let everybody else know, we are going to steal your time, we're making Boghossian's life or whoever's life miserable, we're going to make this guy's life miserable, so you stay in line too. And if you don't stay in line, you'll be like Boghossian. You'll be hauled in here every day, you'll be humiliated, all of your students will be called, your TAs, your colleagues, and then, if I may, from my personal experience, we're going to ask them, we're not going to say that you beat your wife and your family, but we're going to ask them what they know about you beating your wife and your children. Just asking the question. People walking to me up on campus, like, what is this? They're asking about you beating your wife and children. They asked me if I knew anything about it. So that again, I think it's hard to make the shift, but I think we need to be really honest about something. That is the kind of people these people are. They are psychopaths beholden to an ideology, and they have found a perfect community that they can fit into of other psychopaths. Okay, so so I know that people are sitting here and like, wow, holy shit, this is like serious. Like we have institutional threats, we have international threats, we have threats. I don't want to feel like I'm walking on eggshells. We have universities, our engines of knowledge production are potentially compromised. We have the foreign students who have come for some glimpse or gasp of freedom, and it's very interesting. You didn't mention talk about it, but what's happening in Iran right now, and the war, and Iranian dissidents who have gone around the world. And okay, so people are probably thinking to themselves, what can I do? Our engines of knowledge production are compromised. Our peer-reviewed journals. This must seem overwhelming. What can people here in New Zealand do? Is there anything people can do to ameliorate this madness?
Yeah, there are concrete steps we can take. So first, starting at the university level, if your university doesn't have good free speech commitments, good academic freedom commitments, now is the time to start. I actually, before this started, was having a conversation with some professors in the audience about efforts to do that at their university. But that's a place to start. You need to have viewpoint neutral policies. This is the underlying basis of free speech work. You need to have policies that recognize that power, whether it's the government, whether it's the president of the country or the university, does not get to decide who has free speech based on whether they personally like what they have to say. So viewpoint neutral rules are the way to start. Then when it comes to the foreign interference question, you need to look at what kind of partnerships your university has, what kind of funding, whether they're being transparent about the funding, and whether they have protections built in to those foreign entanglements. Spoiler alert, they don't. I could just say without even looking, they probably don't, because most don't. And here's why. It's because it's very difficult to acknowledge that you need to build these things in, because most universities do not want to admit that they have a problem to start with. They don't want to admit that there's something inherently worrying about building ties with the Chinese government.
I want to comment on that because I think it's so important. Here's what I think the problem with that is. I think you have multi-tiered problems and you have like a meta problem with that. So in the same way that regulatory bodies have been, and I'm just thinking about not only the United States, but Western Europe, again, I think Eastern Europe is very, very separate, but the whole WPATH trans files, does anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, so in the same way that as far as I know, institutions say, holy shit, like we made a horrible mistake. We allowed young people to be mutilated, to be lifelong medical patients, to never have an orgasm, and we were beholden to, we did what was in the best interest of what we thought was in the best interest, but we really, really legitimately made a mistake, and we're so sorry, and we're gonna take steps X, Y, and Z to correct that. I haven't heard any of that. So until I hear those kinds of mea culpas, but even beyond that, these are the steps we're going to take to prevent foreign influence. And we have had a problem with that, and we need to be honest about that. But that's the failure to do so lends to the crisis of legitimacy and the lack of trust in those institutions. So, I mean, maybe it's another thing we'll disagree on. We have time to go to the Q&A, but until those steps are taken, to say that I am not hopeful is the most charitable thing that I can say. I mean, I think they should be burned to the ground.
We'll differ on that.
Okay.
But yes, there needs to be some kind of acknowledgement that there has been error. And it's going to be very difficult to get that kind of acknowledgement on the part of universities, which are usually not a big fan of admitting error.
Yeah, but more than that, though, they have to just not only say that we made a mistake, but this is what we're going to do to fix it.
Yes, and what they also need to do is a clear line of steps, what they're going to do if there's another violation.
Correct.
And yes, what needs to be in there is we will leave. We will abandon this partnership if our fundamental values are being abridged.
Correct.
And that really does not exist for most. And it's because you don't want to walk away from that money. But there needs to be more faculty involvement on these things. I think faculty can be better trusted to address these concerns. I mean, they're the ones that are more likely to maybe be arrested by foreign governments because of what they teach or research. So universities need to be bringing them in for these conversations. Yeah. And then, there's a lot more that can be done on campuses when it comes to free speech. That we could go further into, but I want to take a step back a little bit. And part of the reason why things have gotten so bad on this front is because there's a market incentive. We were talking about this. There's a market incentive to appease, to conform, to self-silence, and maybe part of the answer is going to have to be creating a market incentive against that. Saying as a consumer, I want to attend universities that do not, engage in this kind of self-censorship. I want to buy from companies that aren't printing their books in a country that gets to pass things by a censorship board. I want to watch movies that have not been edited so that they can be released with approval in China. And so some of it is, going to be on us. And, we we expected, well, I don't know if we, but a lot of people expected that, as we become more global, as the world becomes more global, as we become more interconnected, that the values of people who are creating this content are going to spread. But it hasn't worked that way. And so maybe we need to accept that there needs to be a little bit more on the part of the consumer to say, these are my values, and I want a company that is not going to be giving me products that have been run through a Chinese censorship board.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable. And then I think another step back, this is, as broad as we can get, as voters, as individuals, as citizens, we need to be thinking more carefully about what kind of speech restrictions we're pursuing.
Totally.
I mean, we have right now an entire global push to age verify the internet. And age verification is identity verification.
Totally.
And we are just sleepwalking into no more internet anonymity. And so we need to think more carefully about what kind of speech laws we're passing, because maybe you'll think that your government won't be so bad about it, but maybe a foreign power will abuse these bad laws. And so we need to be a little bit more responsible.
I was going to end there, but I just want to say that's such an important. People don't understand what that means. I've realized that very few things can persuade people to do anything. If lung cancer can't persuade people to stop smoking, there's very few things to go. So all the men in here, I have to tell you this. The moment age verification comes in, everybody is going to know your sexual proclivities if you watch pornography.
The EU's
It's all logged. Yeah.
The EU announced this week that they have a new app that's going to be available to all member states within the EU, so they can, use age verification, make sure kids aren't on social media. It was hacked in like 2 minutes. These things are not, maybe you think, okay, my government's going to be good. My government is not going to be finding out what I'm doing. Somebody else will. We are really looking down the barrel of no more anonymous speech, and I am really freaked out by it.
Yeah, that's a whole conversation. You've been fantastic. Your work is great. Your book is great. Authoritarians in the Academy. Sarah McLaughlin.
Thank you, Peter.